You're listening to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. As an American, you have freedom flowing through your DNA, and we are here to help educate, empower, and encourage you to stand for your freedom.
Hello, County Citizens. Today we are coming to you from Miami-Dade with our AED, Alex Serrano, and we have a very special guest, attorney and doctor, Dr. Steve Christie.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm a 56-year-old married father of five. I'm a physician in town here. I guess the reason I'm here today is because I've been doing a lot of work outside of my profession. I've been actively involved in the pro-life movement and writing a book and doing a lot of speaking. Mm-hmm. Usually when I do interviews like this, I usually get a long introduction that goes something about me being a physician. They say I know a fair amount about science and embryology, and as a lawyer I know a fair amount about the law and the Constitution, and as a father of five I know a fair amount of babies and pregnancy, and as a husband of 25 years, I've come to understand the difficulties of balancing for a woman her family life with her career life. And people make a big fuss that that's a great background for speaking on the issue of abortion. But actually, my most interesting qualification is none of these. What I think makes me most qualified to speak on this subject is the fact that I spent the first 35 years of my life as a secular pro-choice liberal. So I understand exactly why and how the other side feels about abortion. And having lived in both the pro-choice and now the pro-life worlds, have a fairly unique vantage point from which to address these issues. I like to say that when I was pro-choice, I learned the arguments, but when I became pro-life, I learned the truth. And this book and my presentations is this truth.
Mm-hmm. And you were also an atheist, correct?
Yeah, I was raised as a progressive secular atheist, very pro-choice. I was born into a family. My mother's Jewish, my father's Greek Orthodox, and they had to elope to get married because they're from separate religions. In fact, they were so frightened after they were eloped, they went back to their own houses. I was actually raised as an atheist. We had Christmas was Santa Claus. I had one day of Hanukkah because I liked getting gifts, and Easter was the Easter Bunny. And then a strange thing happened in life. I met a very strong-willed, very Catholic, and very Cuban woman. And so she had this crazy idea that she would marry a non-Catholic. And long story short, over the next 10 years, I slowly became a Catholic. Interesting, actually, when I met her, she was a smoker. She smoked cigarettes, and I said to her one day before we got engaged, I said, I don't know that I could marry a smoker. And she said to me, I don't know that I can marry a man who doesn't go to church on Sundays. So we both took care of those two things. We like to joke that we saved each other. Mm-hmm. And that's where we've been. So that was sort of the conversion over the next 10 years or so to my faith. And it sort of coincided with my conversion from being pro-choice to pro-life.
So what was that moment that started you off thinking from going pro-choice to pro-life?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I went to this very progressive, very secular, very spoiled high school here in town, where it was obvious that if you were a thinking person, you were well-formed, you were clearly pro-choice. It was so obvious we didn't even know why that was the case. And if you were uneducated, brainwashed, and maybe a Jesus freak, then potentially you might have been pro-life. And I went to law school still being pro-choice, and if you'd asked me why, I couldn't have articulated why. And then went to medical school and started off still being pro-choice, and I couldn't have told you why. And it's there I met my wife, and it was actually, medical school is interesting because it's the first exposure to the truth of embryology and the truth of science. And as Shakespeare says, the truth will out. So we learn in medical school that the definition of what is alive is a scientific question that science has fully answered. It's not a question of philosophy. It's not a question of religion. It's not a question of politics. It's a scientific question that science has answered. So you start learning what that truth is. And for me, there actually wasn't a particular moment. One evening I was in the anatomy lab, late at night studying, and there's an anteroom off the side of the lab. It's dark, the lights aren't on, it's covered in dust and old chairs, and I walked in the room one night, just walking around, and I see a cabinet up against the wall. And it's covered in dust and is off to the side, and I walk around to the front of the cabinet, and I can see jars of formaldehyde with babies in them, embryos and fetuses in different stages of development. And I kept looking at them and looking at them, and I suddenly became horrified at how irreverently these babies were being displayed. Clearly this was, at one point, it was a display for somebody, but it's probably been sitting there for years and years covered in dust in the storage room. And I was really horrified. So the next day I hunted down our embryology professor, who was a wonderful teacher, and I confessed to her privately. I said, I have to tell you, I saw these babies and I was horrified. And she got agitated, she got angry, she got mad, and she pointed to me, literally, and she said to me, "They were never babies. They are embryos and fetuses. They were never alive. They were never alive. They were never alive." And I froze and looked at her, and she froze and looked at me. And there's another Shakespeare line, "The lady doth protest too much," from Hamlet. I knew the truth that moment, and I knew she knew the truth that moment. We just looked at each other, and for the first time ever, I said to myself, those were babies, and they were alive. And that was the big change for me. That was the big change that started me off. Mm-hmm. From there, I actually became originally an OBGYN. I trained for 2 years and I was an OBGYN. And when you actually hold babies in your hands, women are having miscarriages, and you hold a fetus or an embryo as they're miscarrying, you can't escape the truth. You can't escape the truth. It's in your hands. So that was the moment that changed me, and then there were a bunch of progressive steps from after that.
Can you give us some background? And I know there's some other cases as well, not just Roe v. Wade, but can you give us some background as to how this whole thing started? Sure.
So I don't want to. My wife, when I give these talks, usually is in the audience, and she puts her hand across her neck. She says, "Steve, cut out the legal stuff. Cut out the legal stuff. You're going too long." So I'll try to be brief here. So
you're with the right audience.
Yeah.
So this
we're into the legal
and my wife
stuff.
doesn't know I'm here, so I should be safe for a little while. Anyway, she might call. If she calls, just don't put her through. So the case that led to all this was called Griswold versus Connecticut, and this was in 1965. And here the court did something unusual. They found that they said that there was a constitutional right to privacy. This is a profound statement. There's a constitutional right to privacy in the Constitution. It had to do with marital law and contraception, but that wasn't the essential element. There was a profound fundamental right to privacy, and the court searched the Constitution and looked for the word privacy, and they found it exactly nowhere in the Constitution at all. So they found it in what they called penumbras. And I always joke that nobody knows what a penumbra is, and if you go to the dictionary, it's these shadows cast by opaque objects. Nobody, even after you read the definition, you don't know what a penumbra is. So they found this implied right, and they said it was somehow implied in the Bill of Rights, maybe in the First, or maybe the Third, or maybe the Fourth, or maybe the Fifth Amendment, or maybe the Ninth Amendment. They weren't exactly sure where it came from, but they said there were these zones of privacy that were implied, and therefore there is this constitutional right to privacy. And that's a profound statement. It's a very controversial statement. A lot of people think that's bad law. There are people on both sides of the aisle that think it's acceptable law. That's the first step. So a right to privacy existed in 1965. Then in 1973, Roe v. Wade came. And Roe v. Wade said, and this is the way constitutional adjudication, as it's called, when we build precedent upon precedent. Once there's a law, we don't relitigate that law. We now know there's a right to privacy because Griswold said so. So now Roe comes along, and we know there is privacy. And Griswold makes this bold statement, Roe makes this bold statement that this right to privacy that exists because of Griswold, it now encompasses the right of a woman to abort her child. Another huge step. They listed many sources for this right and how it could be expanded, and they list the First, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Ninth, and the 14th Due Process Clause, which is really where we stand now with this. It's very complicated. I could explain a little bit about the 14th Due Process Clause. And they said it's some combination of these things says that this right to privacy now extends to a mother's decision to abort her child. And that's this gigantic ruling of Roe v. Wade in 1973. They also said, it may come up in other parts of the discussion that we have, they also made this declaration that a fetus is not a person with respect to the Constitution, so that it's not accorded the rights and liberties that the Constitution provides to all persons. So all these rights that we hear about in the Constitution, they're given to persons, and they say a fetus is not a person. They set up this fancy trimester framework where they're balancing the rights of autonomy for a woman versus the rights of the fetus. And they try to balance it at a point of viability. It's a very complex structure they put together, but that's Roe. So Griswold says there's privacy. Roe says privacy extends to the right to abort your child. Then in 1992, Casey versus Planned Parenthood comes up and they look at Roe and they say there's a lot of problems with Roe, but we're going to keep the overall holding. We think this viability thing is important. We're going to reaffirm that there's a right to abortion in the Constitution. We don't see it there, but it's an implied fundamental right, and we can go into where they get implied fundamental rights if you want to as well. And so it was interesting. The majority of justices for that opinion didn't actually agree with Roe's decision, with the mechanism of their decision, and they even said so in their opinions. But what they did say is that precedent and what's called stare decisis, and that is respect for the law, that we want to be able to depend on law and not have it changing all the time. So since 1973, we've depended and counted on Roe. So the respect we have for that law is enough to uphold it in Casey. So Casey says we're going to throw out that trimester framework. We're just going to deal with viability, pre-viability restrictions and post-viability restrictions. And there's actually an argument you can say they're saying it's no longer a fundamental right. They don't actually expressly use those words, I don't think, but they changed what's called the burden of proof. So when something is fundamental for a state to impose a law, it has to pass what they call strict scrutiny. I'm getting in the weeds here. If it's not a fundamental liberty, then the state's laws only have to pass what's called the rational basis test, which is easy to pass. So if it's something that's declared fundamental, it's a profound statement by the court.
Is viability specified at a certain stage?
Okay, great question. And so I'm bring up a lot of issues, and I should pause. So viability is the ability of a fetus or embryo to live outside the uterus, but not unsupported, supported with state-of-the-art medical care. So at the time of Roe said viability was 28 weeks.
And that makes the fetus now a person with rights?
They don't even declare it as being a person with rights, but that's when they say the balance, that's the balance when a state, so what they actually say is a state may prohibit or restrict abortion at viability. This is when we start getting into Casey. At viability, if they want to. New York might never want to restrict the rights of abortion at any point in pregnancy, but if a state wants to, they said after viability, a state can restrict or prohibit abortion if they want to, with a couple of exceptions, what they call the life and health of the mother, which are nonsense, but we can talk about that as well. So Casey reaffirms Roe's central holding, as they call it, which is the right to abortion. They get rid of the trimester framework, and they say that before viability, a state can put restrictions as long as it's not a, quote, undue burden. It's a special test they have. The test is unclear. Different justices have applied it differently, so it's a very unworkable standard. And then after viability, Casey says, it follows Roe's rule that says states can restrict if they want to, except for the life and the health of the mother. So after viability, if a state says no abortions, but the mother's life at risk, Casey and Roe say she can still get an abortion. That's a fiction, because in the third trimester, there's never, ever a situation when you need to abort a viable child. A third trimester abortion takes 2 to 3 days to perform, and a delivery takes only hours. So if a woman needs to, for an emergency, or her health or life is at risk, she needs chemotherapy, there's been an accident, deliver the baby, don't kill the baby. And the other restriction they say is about the health of the mother. So if the health of the mother is at risk, even if the state says you can't have an abortion, if the health of the mother is at risk, she can get an abortion. The problem with that is a case called Doe versus Bolton, which happened the same day as Roe, and they defined that the health of the mother includes emotional well-being. So if at any time during your pregnancy you feel distressed, and so we've got 5 kids, and I can tell you from the day my wife was pregnant to the day she delivered, she was distressed 24 hours a day, and she's a strong woman. So at any time during that pregnancy, to the day before she delivered, if she feels distressed, she qualifies for an abortion. So we say that Griswold and Roe and Casey give what I call the abortion trifecta, an unlimited right to abortion at any time for any reason. Now the big case, so I used to give these talks and I would say there's 3 Supreme Court cases you need to know, the 3 we've already now talked about, but now that's changed. So now we have this big Dobbs case. So Dobbs was argued this year, and there's this leaked opinion. So Dobbs has a law in Mississippi.
Supreme Court as well, right?
Right, absolutely. So
can I ask one question?
Sure, hit me, of course.
Were all of those people men?
Now it's interesting, the justices in the first court in Roe were all men. So we can get these discussions whether men should have a right to this opinion or not. So the justices for the Roe court, where the pro-choice people are so thrilled, they were 9 white men. So now I get a lot of talk about that I'm a misogynist and I have no rights to opinion. We can talk about that when we go through the individual arguments. But those were 9 white men who said there was a fundamental right to abortion. So Dobbs is a fascinating case now. So Dobbs, Mississippi passed a law and they said no abortions after 15 weeks, which absolutely contravenes Casey, who says that before viability, you can only have a restriction if it's not an undue burden, meaning the litigation for undue burden has to do, they might say, well, what about a law that makes you get an ultrasound before an abortion? Is that an undue burden? Maybe it is. What about a law that says you need to tell your spouse you're going to get an abortion? Is that an undue burden? What about a law that says if you're going to have an abortion, it needs to be in a surgical center or with a doctor that has privileges to be in a nearby hospital if something goes wrong? Are those undue burdens? So those are sophisticated arguments. The Mississippi law is very clear. They're saying there's no abortions. So it's clearly an undue burden. It flies in the face of all these cases. So it goes to the Supreme Court. And so Dobbs was heard about 2 months ago, I think in December. And it was an interesting oral argument to listen to for 2 hours, and everybody was guessing which way it would go, and the pro-life movement was very optimistic. I re-listened to the arguments today while I worked, and I will say that the pro-choice, 2 pro-choice lawyers were fantastic, brilliant lawyers. I would want them on my team in whatever case I was arguing. Just so happens I think they're on the wrong side of the law, but they did a fantastic job. So it was fascinating to listen to the case again today as in preparation for coming in today. And then we have last month the famous leaked draft opinion by Alito. Now, we're sort of assuming that is going to be the final opinion in some form, but we really don't know. And if that's the case, the leaked opinion says that Roe was egregiously decided, is the language they said, and Roe and Casey are officially overturned, which doesn't mean abortion is illegal. It just means abortion is no longer protected federally by the Constitution, and we send that back to the states where a lot of people argue it should have been in the first place, that this law, which is not specifically, this right, which is not specifically found in the Constitution, is better left to the states to decide, which is a whole nother discussion about and again, I get into the weeds here about what we talked about is enumerated rights and unenumerated or implied rights. So an enumerated right in the Constitution is very clear. We know where the right exists. So if you look at the first 8 amendments in the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, the freedom of the press and the freedom of religion and the right to bear arms and assembly. If you're not sure if you have the right to assembly, you look up in the Constitution, and we all have these books here. We look it up. Oh yeah, boom! I have the right to assembly. I've got the right to free press. I've got the right to free speech. It's there. Courts have always been very hesitant to decide, well, there's this implied right. It was never written in the Constitution, but had they contemplated it, maybe they would have put it in there. So the word privacy, we said, was never in the Constitution. But now privacy is a fundamental right in the Constitution. That's a bold thing to say. It's bold because it's not there. It's bold because it's prone to abuse. Maybe one set of justices believe in it and another set of justices don't believe in it. It's prone to controversy that can be very long-standing. And so generally, courts are reluctant to do it. And implied rights come from several sources. The one at hand now and the most common is called, this is really in the weeds, it's called substantive due process. So the 14th Amendment has procedural due process and substantive due process that gives right to implied fundamental rights if a 2-part test is met. And that's
the implied is that it's implied in the Constitution, even though it's not.
Right. That it's written. Somehow, if you read the whole document, you sort of get the feeling.
Extrapolating.
You sort of get the feeling it should be there, and that's a dangerous thing. So you have a very progressive liberal court, you're going to get certain rights that they're fond of. You get a very conservative court, you might get rights that they're fond of. Although we would argue that conservative justices don't agree with that form of interpretation, so they're less likely to do that. Although I guess we're all that can be possible.
For our listeners, so Dobbs is the one that was heard this year, right?
So Dobbs
15
is
weeks.
And that's the one.
What was the outcome?
So the outcome is that Roe and Casey are overturned. That Roe was egregiously decided and has been that decision whether or not to make abortion legal has been returned to the states.
But that's the implied outcome of the leak. But what about
Dobbs? We don't. That's the Dobbs leak, but we don't have the formal Dobbs opinion. We're expecting it maybe next month. Now, a lot of people, we speculate as to why or who leaked it, and we speculate, and everybody has their theories. I have my theory, based on nothing. But we have our theories of who did the leak, and we can have our theories about whether it will hold. A lot of people say, most people on both sides say this is going to hold in some form or another. But I could be giving a talk next week, and as I start the talk, an hour before, we could find out that Roe is not overturned. So
it could be any time now.
Any time now. People are speculating probably certainly by the end of June, so sometime this month.
One more thing. So if Dobbs started because of not allowing abortions after 15 weeks. Didn't Florida just pass something similar?
Right, so Florida's passed the same thing. And if these laws, if Roe is overturned, Roe and Casey are overturned, as we suspect they are, what's going to happen now is it's returned to the states. It's estimated between 24 to 26, 20 to 28 states or so are going to either significantly restrict or prohibit abortion. 14-ish so states are going to allow it, maybe up to the moment of birth, and the remainder are unclear. So, but it's, we believe in federalism, most of us, and some things are left to the states. And so those of us in the pro-life movement, if you think that overturning Roe was the end, that's the beginning. So the lawyers worked on getting this happening, and now it's left to us, which ultimately will bring us to the book and what I do.
Would you expect if the leak holds that Florida will go even stricter, let's say?
I believe in incrementalism, so Florida's at 15 weeks now, and I think that's a fantastic start. I'm against all abortion, but as I told you, I was raised in a secular progressive household. My family, my friends, they're all very pro-choice. And if you give me a weekend, we can compromise on lots of things. I won't be totally happy at all, and they won't be either. But I believe in incrementalism, so I think 15 is a great start. I'm much more comfortable getting it down to 12 to 8, and then we'll revisit that a little bit. I'll get it down to 6. And I'm not being manipulative. I just think we're going to understand the truth. We have facts, science, and truth on our side, and those things are very powerful. And so if I have to bring people along slowly, I'm a patient guy, and that's where we'll go. If I was the king, I'd make it illegal today. That would be a bad thing to do. Tyranny is a bad way to rule. So I don't want to do it that way. I want to bring people on board. I want to open hearts and open minds and get people to come to my side, and that's what
this is all about.
That's what I do in this movement.
I like
Right
that
in the light.
perspective. Yeah.
So it's fascinating. And everybody has their speculations, where the leak came from. So they say, well, it certainly came from a liberal justice clerk because they want to convince. They want the public outcry to convince somebody who's sitting on the fence on the conservative side to come over. And then I've heard the other side is certainly a conservative justice clerk because they're worried one of their justices might turn, and this way they'll be afraid to turn because they'll be ridiculed for having capitulated to the crowd. My friend has the theory that I'm going with, by the way, and I have to be careful how I phrase this. He says all bad things usually come down to one thing. Some guy trying to impress a girl. He said, so probably he was sitting on a photocopy machine, some guy saw it, brought it and showed it to his girlfriend, trying to look good. So that's my current theory. We'll see where that goes.
All right.
Standing ovation.
Standing ovation.
That was the applause. We have sound effects. I'm very glad.
Yeah, we have a little bit of an audience today. But I do want to bring up your new book, Speaking for the Unborn, 30-second pro-life rebuttals to pro-choice arguments. And if you're watching, hopefully this focuses and you can go ahead and see it. But what sparked you to write this book?
So, yeah, great question. So there's two real answers I usually have to that. The first reason I wrote the book is, well, there are 62 million reasons. 62 million abortions in the United States alone since 1973 in Roe v. Wade. And if what's being aborted is not alive and it's not a human, then it really doesn't matter. But if those abortions are of living human beings, then we've killed 62 million children, and that's why I wrote the book. The other reason I wrote the book is because I really believe the pro-life cause is a winning one. We have so many strong, persuasive arguments on our side that it's exciting to bring them out to the world. I had, like a lot of people in the pro-life movement, I have heard many, many wonderful pro-life arguments and rebuttals over the years. I've collected them, and I thought it was time to edit them, compile them, and put them in a format, rewrite them and put them in a format where they're user-friendly, where you can actually sort of memorize them as bullet points and bring them into real life discussions to convert people to open hearts and open minds. And so I thought from my fairly unique perspective, having, being a doctor, a lawyer, a father, a husband, and having been pro-choice, it's a great perspective from which to bring this. So I think it's a winning cause. I not to get too much into religion, but I'm a wacky Catholic on the side here. So I try to do a lot of apostolate and bring people to our faith, and that's frustrating for me. I struggle with it, and I go out there in the world and I want to convert people, and you don't see the fruits of your labors very often, and maybe there are no fruits, or maybe they're years down the road. That's not the case with the pro-life movement. I've been doing this for a bunch of years now. It's very, very rare. And it's not because I'm a great arguer or debater. It's just because the cause is so strong. It's very rare that I can't convert somebody who's pro-choice to at least agreeing to me to get to limit to 12 weeks or to 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. And so that's very exciting and it's very motivating. So that's really the other reason I wrote the book.
I put it to the test recently.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So I'm on a few WhatsApp chats, and one of them is very liberal, and the Roe v. Wade leak was being discussed. Mm-hmm. I had just read the book, and the one that I thought was most impactful, the rebuttal that I thought was most impactful, at least to me, and that I thought applied at the moment, was the 7 criteria for life. And when I tried it, and I did my best to follow your rules, to not be confrontational, not be aggressive or anything like that, I simply listed them out and put a check mark next to them. And the person that on the other side said, even though that may be a fact, and then they went on to reinforce their argument, but I thought that was a win. They met me in, I don't think I can argue what you just listed is not fact.
I've said it already here today. We rely on science, facts, and truth. I mean, we can be tricky if we want to and try to do gotcha arguments, but I don't do any of those. So my book, and no, I don't. And we can talk about, I don't do religious arguments either. So science, facts, and truth. The other side really relies on cliches. It's my body, my choice. They don't know what it means. Reproductive freedom, reproductive justice. These cliches. They rely on personal attacks. I'm a misogynist, and they rely heavily on rhetorical deception. You go into a Planned Parenthood clinic and they'll tell you, would you like us to restore your period? That it's not a baby, it's a clump of cells. Mm-hmm. And so the facts, the truth, and science outweigh those things all the time. So it's a winning. It's really exciting to be on a winning side, mm-hmm. And it's very motivating for me and for everybody else on this movement to keep going. One of the things that was a little frustrating, and another reason I wrote this book, is because when I discuss or debate with pro-choice people, and I make an argument, I'm shocked how it's incredibly rare that a pro-choice person can make an articulate argument in their defense. They're not prepared. And there are some arguments that are reasonable that they could make that are worth discussion. But they're unprepared. But what I've also learned is, on our side, the pro-life side, we're also very unprepared to make our arguments. Mm-hmm. So they said, I said, what's wrong with abortion? They say, it's wrong. I say, yes, it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Well, it's wrong. And it's great to know that it's wrong, but that's not enough to sustain a movement. You have to be able to articulate our reasons why mm-hmm. it's wrong. So the book puts together, I took every pro-choice argument I could find over the years, and I organized them into categories which help us to organize our rebuttals. And then I give multiple options for each rebuttal, for each argument. I put them in sort of as bullet points. You can memorize them and recall them very easily. And you can find which one works for you. Sometimes you're more comfortable with one than the other, or you combine and make your own. And I always say you practice them 5 times, preferably with a debate partner, a friend, and then go out there and practice them. So, you talked about the criteria for life. They're very clear. The idea of what is alive, that's a debate the pro-choice movement lost a long time ago. It's a scientific question that science has fully answered. If you go to any embryology book used at any medical school across the country, it's clear. The 7 criteria for life are absolutely clear, and life begins at conception. In fact,
Planned Parenthood even admitted it, right?
Oh, they've been in their own publications originally. They now never will state that, but in their original publications, they actually say life as a child is ended at
How much did you learn about abortion in med school?
We learn embryology, so we learn a lot about it. I was very lucky. I learned in my years nothing about abortion. When I became an OBGYN, abortions were not performed at our public hospital mm-hmm. officially. But it was my understanding that they were performed unofficially. Now, so there I am, as an OBGYN, young, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole, and if a boss had asked me, come in and assist me with this procedure, because that's what we do as when we first start, we're assisting everybody. I thank God nobody ever asked me to go in there. I don't know at that point if I would have had the spine to say, I'm sorry, I don't do that. So I'm glad it never happened to me. So I never saw that. I saw miscarriages all the time, which really reminds you that a good human anthropology is that we protect. When you hold in your hands a little 8-week or 10-week or 12-week-old baby, you are reminded that our job in life as human beings is to protect the most vulnerable among us. We don't take the most vulnerable and discard them. One's vulnerability should incline us more to rush to their defense. So those are some of the interesting things that happen. The other thing that I found, so we have these rebuttals and the arguments, and we can go through any of them that you want.
Oh, we will.
But one of the things that I also learned that I thought was really important is when I said we don't articulate, the pro-life people don't articulate our own position. So when I started this book, I kept on saying, okay, I got to be able to tell people why I'm pro-life. I can make my rebuttals, but if somebody says, well, why are you pro-life? I want to say more than abortion is wrong. Right. So I put together slowly over time, and again, stealing from lots of people, my 30-second summary of why I'm pro-life. So if somebody says to me, and I've learned the opportunity to explain your position comes up fairly regularly. It's not at all uncommon, and you might get one chance to make your case for life, and you want to make it count. So you want to be prepared when somebody says, you're pro-life? Why are you pro-life? So I have a 30-second summary. I can give you I can say it for you if you want.
Sure.
Why are you pro-life?
So I'll probably panic now and mess it up here, but so I say that I'm pro-life because I'm pro-science, because there's overwhelming scientific consensus that life begins at conception. And I'm pro-life because social justice begins in the womb. Because every living human being is entitled to the most fundamental of human rights, that being life itself, because being a burden on someone is never justification for killing them. And I'm pro-life because I'm pro-woman, because abortion degrades women, treating their fertility as a defect, enabling men to use and abandon them at their most vulnerable. Abortion never empowers women, only the men who wish to exploit them. And I'm pro-women because I'm against violence. Abortion is not only immoral, but is an act of extreme violence against the most vulnerable. I'm pro-life because of the visible evidence, because ultrasound and now MRI clearly reveal to the world what's moving inside a woman, a living human baby. And lastly, I'm pro-life because of moral conscience. Because if abortion is the killing of an innocent living human being, then it's both cowardly and immoral to remain silent. And that's why I'm pro-life. And then I always say, and why aren't you? And invariably, I get this answer. Misogynist, nothing. You just yelled something at me. Right. I'm sorry, that was probably too loud for the microphone. So, I panicked a little bit in my thing because I got the lights on me in the studio, but practice your summary and be able to articulate. And maybe yours is different than mine, write yours, but maybe yours is short. Maybe you disagree on a couple of these, but write the one that fits for you, why you're pro-life, and be able to articulate it, because when that opportunity arises, you might get one shot. You want to make it count. So I think that's great. Once you have that, then you're almost ready for the arguments. There's one other thing that I always say that you should have, and that is, along with this book, Speaking for the Unborn, is a website called speakingfortheunborn.org. And there's a series of teaching videos, 4 15-minute videos, that teach you everything you need to know about abortions so that you can then speak on behalf of the unborn. So it goes through the legal cases. So when somebody challenges you on Griswold, you can at least know a little bit about Griswold. It goes through the science and embryology. So you go through week 1 of embryology. You go through the milestones, so you have a good idea of embryology. It goes through the abortion procedures themselves. So I have animations of the abortion procedures, which are very difficult to watch, and they're just animations. But if you want to spread the truth about abortion, you need to know the truth about abortion.
And what was that resource again?
Speakingfortheunborn.org, and you can get the book through there. I used to be a little embarrassed trying to promote the book. I have no embarrassment anymore. I think the book is for a fantastic cause. I take zero money for the book. The publisher makes money, and whatever little money would ever come to me goes back to the pro-life cause, and I donate it back. So I don't accept not even reimbursement costs for the book. I think it's a fantastic book. You can get it at Amazon or from the publisher. If you go to Amazon and you like the book, please give it 5 stars because it helps the algorithm. If you read the book and you don't like the book, give it 5 stars because it helps the algorithm. And I just think it's a great resource.
What charities or charity does
my wife and I are actually my wife actually works for does ultrasound readings. She's also a radiologist for crisis pregnancy centers here in Dade County. So we decided to stick to Dade County. So that's where they'll be going to. And as of yet, I've received 0 payments. Publisher, you can listen there. I've received 0 payments, so I'm only in debt for the book. But this is, again, this cause I'm happy to be losing money for this project.
Oh my goodness, I have so many questions in my head, but I want to ask this one because I know people listening are going to say, how does radiology deal with abortion? So can you kind of explain?
Sure.
How that...
So obviously, we talked about medical school being exposed to embryology. So that's just to start off with it. But in my actual career as a radiologist, I have read thousands and thousands of fetal ultrasound. So when every pregnant woman gets excited to go for her ultrasound and she wants to see how her baby looks, they come to our centers. And so I'm the one that reads the study, and I get to see the mother and the father see their baby for the first time. And the excitement they have, and to see the heartbeat, and to see the baby moving, and to see the baby suck their thumb. So I'm reminded every day of what I'm seeing. So when they talk about a clump of cells, and I'm watching that clump of cells jump around, suck her thumb, jump and basically, and do the salsa, you realize it's not a clump of cells. So being a radiologist, even more so than just a general physician, not as much so as an OB/GYN would have been the case, but I'm reminded of this all the time with the ultrasounds. And it always reminds me, when you see, if you meet a pro-choice woman who's pregnant and excited about her pregnancy, you know she'll never say to her friend, "You've got to see the beautiful ultrasound pictures of my fetus." It's never a fetus when you want it. It's always a baby when you want it. It's only a fetus when you want to destroy it.
Are there any... If a woman has an abortion, I'm trying to think of how to word this. Is there any negative effects on her body after?
Sure.
Is it hard on the woman's body to get an abortion?
So I try to be honest with all these things, because a lot of people on both sides, we like to exaggerate our point. So is an early abortion a very dangerous procedure? It can be. Can pregnancy be a dangerous thing? It can be. The later the abortion, the worse the effects are. So they can cause sterility. I've watched a woman die from what we call a septic abortion. When I used to work in the GYN emergency room, a woman came in having just had an abortion. She had a light fever. 3 days later, she was in the ICU. A week and a half later, she was throwing emboli to her fingers and toes, which had turned blue. She had her hands amputated, and she finally died. So it's a dangerous procedure. It can lead to infertility and scarring. But far more common than that is the psychological scarring. I mean, we see it all the time in the work in the pro-life movement. The decision to abort a child, if you go back to 1992, Bill Clinton said that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, admitting the seriousness and the sadness that abortion entailed. And now you're supposed to, I don't know what's happened to the world, but now you're supposed to shout your abortion, right? So it's an exciting, wonderful thing, and that's just not true. These women that have had abortions, and by the way, 25% of women is estimated in this country have had abortions, and they are our friends, they're our neighbors, and they are our families and some of our wives. So we need to speak to these women with compassion and not condemnation. Thank God it hasn't touched my own family. Before I was religious and before I was pro-life, thank goodness. But I have made other terrible mistakes in my life. And so we all have made terrible mistakes, and those women deserve our compassion, sympathy, and our help. Many of these women, carry around great shame and guilt from this, and there's organizations that are you can go to the resources in the back of my book and find organizations that help these people and help the men that are involved in these things as well. I get emails regularly from people who have suffered because of their abortions. Recently, I was on an EWTN show, and a woman talked about a beautiful story, and she gave me permission to say her story. She was forced by her own mother at age 16 to get an abortion, and she made the boyfriend drive her to the abortion center, and this was, I think, 46 years ago. The husband and she ended up marrying. They had 3 other kids, and to this day, she suffers terribly about that decision. And she had the most beautiful line that made me cry when I read it. I don't want to cry on camera here. She said at the end of her thing, she said to me, and this is, I think I'm quoting, she said, my child's name is Matthew. He's in heaven. No, he's in heaven. I named him. I just thought when you talk about personalizing what the pro-choice world does not want to personalize, this is not embryonic tissue. These are not clumps of cells. These are living babies. They're unborn babies. So when people have an abortion, they really suffer. And you'll find some people that are claiming they celebrate it. Maybe a few people do, but it's a serious matter. And until recently, the pro-choice movement acknowledged it as well.
Your outlook is it's making me speechless in a way, because a lot of times we hear from the extreme side of the pro-life movement and the pro-choice, and so it's refreshing to have a conversation that is the facts. and what's really happening. And even I want to show this, even in your book, you gave the definitions. And that's something that I've learned, is that you can't argue for something if you're talking about two different things. You have to be on the same page about what you're defining to even start a conversation about an embryo or a fetus, because you could have a completely different idea in your head about what a fetus is than I do.
Yeah, and you point out a great point. And one of the things on my website is, speakingfortheunborn.org, is I have purchased the rights to images and videos of fetuses and embryos at different stages of development. And you can download them to your phone or your computer for free. And it's amazing what the effects of these images and videos have on people. So a lot of times somebody's going to say to you, well, at 8 weeks it's just a clump of cells. I can argue why it's not a clump of cells, but sometimes it's better just to take out your phone and say, look, do you mind me showing you an image? Do you think this is a clump of cells? And often, my experience is they do this. Oh my goodness. Oh my God, I didn't realize. So we're sharing the truth with these people. And again, in the beginning of the book, we talk about strategy a lot. So we talk about where we speak and how we speak, and then then finally the words that we speak. And I think strategy is really important because we all get hot under the collar. You know, I'm told all the time I'm a misogynist. I don't care about women's rights, and I don't care somehow about my wife and my daughters, right? Because I'm a misogynist, and I want to strike back. But that doesn't get anywhere. So always ask yourself, are the words that I'm speaking, are they productive, and I'm actually trying to change the mind of somebody? So when we talk about where we speak, I think it's really important. So some people, very few of us are going to be, congressmen and congresswomen. They're going to be changing the laws in legislatures, and that's fantastic. If you're an appellate court attorney and you're going to be arguing in front of appellate courts and the Supreme Court, that's fantastic. But the rest of us are going to work in the ordinary, everyday circumstances of our daily lives with one person at a time, our friends, our families, and our neighbors. And that's what we do. We're changing hearts. And people always say to me, what the hell does that mean, changing hearts? And the way I've learned is, when I'm debating or discussing with somebody, I'm not worried about winning arguments. I'm winning hearts, so I'm not sticking them in the eye. It doesn't do me any good to win the argument and I'm like, yeah, baby, I showed that guy. I taught him a lesson. I didn't help the cause at all. So the words I always want to hear from the person I'm speaking with when I'm debating, I want them to say, Steve, that's interesting. I never really thought about it that way before. That's, wow, that's interesting. That's the sound of the heart opening to the truth. And that's what I always focus on. And for me, it's easy because I grew up with all my friends and family being pro-choice. So how would I speak to my best buddy, Andy? How do I speak to my mom and my dad? I'm not going to stick them in the eye. And sometimes you actually have to lose a little argument to win their heart down the road. So it's a gentle process, but that's we're in here for the long term.
So I have a question for you, because a lot of what we do as an organization is addressing what we call breaches of liberty. Right? So our process dictates that we first search and identify what we call a breach of liberty, which, to define a breach, is essentially anything that deviates from our standard of measure as an organization, which is the founding documents of our nation, U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, which we coincidentally both have the same copy of in front of us here. And then once we identify a breach, we go through a very specific process, which I'm trying to, structure here as it relates to this topic. And that process is we practice a biblical model that's called, that comes from the book of Matthew 18. And it's to address the source of the breach first. And we typically do this at the local level, so this gets a little bit, wider reaching in terms of Dobbs and Roe and everything like that. Sure. But once we address the source, if the source does not retract the breach after we've notified them of the violation or whatever law or statute or constitutional right may be being violated, if they decide not to retract, then we pursue the rest of our process, which is to expose the breach, or we call it shining light on the breach. And ideally, what we're looking for when we shine the light on the breach, which to a degree is educating our local citizenry on the topic. And I think this is precisely what we're doing here and what we're going to do tomorrow night in the event that we're hosting with you. We expect, or we hope, that the local citizenry is going to act on it. So our slogan is local light, local action. And we expect that the local citizenry's actions will cause the source of the breach to retract. And we do this by first shining light on a topic, informing them, educating them, and then calling them to action. So my question to you is, if you, and you're gonna have this opportunity tomorrow, you have an audience where you're gonna shine light. You've shined the light today for me, and I know for Lindsay quite a bit. What would your call to action be for, you know, a typical Miami-Dade County citizen that may not have heard any of this? They were rookies. They were completely green to pro-life, pro-choice. What were your call to action?
First, most importantly, you should buy 100 copies of my book. Sorry, just kidding.
And they will be for sale.
The point for me is, if you're Ben Shapiro and you're about to go to a stadium with 1,000 people and you're going to make your case, that's amazing. That's not me, and that's probably not the people we're going to be talking with. Correct. But I want to motivate everybody to get excited about the cause, to realize the truth of the cause, and then go out and talk to one person. And that doesn't have to be their congressman. It means their mother, who's not pro-choice, who's pro-choice, or their best buddy, or their coworker. And that's how we do this. We do this one person at a time, fanning out. So you need to, what I would tell them, you arm yourself. So you need to, I would say, there's other resources, but here's one for free for you. Go to my website and watch the 4 videos. So you have the background information on what you need on Abortion 101. You got the law, you got the science, you got the abortion procedures, you have the photos, you got the videos, and it's all there for you. Then use the book. And by the way, if anybody listening can't afford the book, you can contact me on the website. I will send you, don't abuse this please, I'll pay for the book and send it to you for free. This is the cause and the movement. So I'll get you the book. Study the book. Or go to Amazon if you want, or speakingfortheunborn.org to get the book. Study your arguments, but make your 30-second summary of why you're pro-life. So you arm yourself, you're ready to get out there in the world. And then practice it on somebody you like and you know who maybe agrees with you the first couple of times, because you'll be nervous. I stammered a little bit when I gave it to you because I got the cameras and the lights on me and I got nervous too. So we all get nervous. Yep. Which brings to mind one other thing I would add to this, preparing people for this, is have courage. So my wife is in this movement, and she has more courage than all of us combined. She's not afraid of anything, and she'll go speak on any important topic with no preparation, and she'll do great. I don't have that courage. I tend to want to write the book and then sort of disappear. But I don't have that luxury. 62 million children need me to speak up for them. Mm-hmm. So coming in here today, I comb my hair, I put on my jacket, I look myself, I thought, oh gosh, okay, I'm gonna get a little nervous for this. How am I gonna do? I'm gonna sweat a little bit. I got a little sweat down my back right now. But I don't have the luxury of not being courageous. So I gotta get out here and do my part. And your part may not be, whoever's watching or listening, may not be getting on camera. That's fine. But your part is, if this is your cause, is to become prepared so that when you're ready, when somebody, your cousin, your best friend's cousin's mother, whoever it is, somebody dear to you, says, you know, I was talking with somebody, this is what happens to me, they'll say, you know, I heard you were pro-life, that struck me as strange. I wouldn't have thought you'd be pro-life, because they think morons are only pro-life, right? And you could say, yeah, I'm pro-life, and say, do you want me to tell you why? Boom, 30-second summary. And they will do this, wow.
You were prepared.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then you could say, yeah, in fact, there's a book I've read, and so tell me why you're pro-choice. Boom, they have no answer. Then you'll help them out. Say, well, let's talk about some of the things I hear. So people say to me, you know, my body, my choice, I get that all the time. Do you want me to tell you why I think my body, my choice isn't such a great argument? And that's what we're arming people to do. From the, structurally, your organization can do a lot more than the individuals themselves, but we're really, my role is to arm individuals. Mm-hmm. So I want individuals to be prepared, and I'm, you know, I don't make a penny from this, I promise. This costs me a lot of money. I want to arm as many people to go out and do good in the world. That's what we're doing. We're doing good. We're not sticking it to people. We're not applauding when people or when somebody wanted an abortion and can't get one and they're suffering. I'm not applauding, oh, you can't get an abortion. I'm rushing to their aid and saying, I know you had thought the abortion was available, maybe it's not available in your state. I can help you. What do you need? Do you need resources? You need housing? Are you a victim of spousal abuse? Do you need a domestic violence hotline? Do you need a place? Do you need me to find you a hotel tonight? So we got to put our money where our mouth is. We're accused a lot of only caring about babies in the womb, which is untrue. But we got to pay attention to that, because all pregnant women need to know that the pro-life movement is on their side. We're not just on the baby side. We're on the mother's side, the husband's side, the baby's side, the family side, and society's side. And we got to put our money where our mouth is, and we do. But we have to step up to the plate and let all pregnant women know we're ready to rush to their aid. And that's what we do. And I like it, the way you all do this, how you reach out, shine the light. You're saying shine.
Right.
It reminds me of, classic Christian fraternal correction.
Yeah, that's what it comes from.
Yeah, it's right. So if somebody has done something wrong, you don't scream and yell at them and tell 87 other people. You quietly meet with them and see if they can correct it. I think it's a wonderful philosophy. A wonderful philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other questions before we?
No.
I mean, if you want to hit me with a couple, not that I'm nervous, so I may mess up. But
I have some questions from listeners. If you want me to shoot some out, but
yeah, sure. And then the last part, I want to ask you a fire round of questions. Can you edit out all my mistakes? Can we do? You'll edit out all my mistakes. Does that work?
Except for the live radio portion, I guess.
Right, but Alex, take the questions from the listeners.
All right. So, is it true that the majority of abortions are already mothers? The majority of people that have abortions are.
It's actually probably about half and half. Okay. Which I think is immaterial to the discussion. So what that argument usually gets to is that it's an unfair burden on women that are already mothers. But the solution, killing living human beings is never a solution to anyone's problem. So if people are saying that a child's going to be born into poverty, we don't eliminate the sufferer, we eliminate the suffering. So if you're worried about whether it's the poverty that woman's in, then we need to rush to her aid. If you're worried about the foster care system that child's going to run into, then we need to fix the foster care system. If you don't think the abortion process is streamlined enough, then we need to streamline the abortion process. We don't kill children to help them. Mm-hmm. And so we get that all the time, that it's a burden, that the best thing to do for an unwanted child is to dismember them. Obviously, that's solutions based on killing innocent living human beings are never acceptable. Mm-hmm. And we get the classic, the classic autonomy, the my body, my choice, and we can go through those either from the my body standpoint or the my choice. So when somebody says it's my body, I say, I fully, and I try to agree where I can agree. So I tell people, I fully respect the autonomy of a woman to control her own body. I just don't think she can control somebody else's body. A pregnancy involves always two bodies, sometimes more if it's triplets, right? So we say the right to swing your fist ends just before it touches my nose. And that's the my body part. The my choice part is not, do you have a choice to kill your child? The question is, do you have a choice to have sex in the first place? And if you decide to do that, you do so taking note with the knowledge that you're taking a risk. You might create a living human being inside you. Mm-hmm. And if you're taking that risk, then you may have to endure the burden, the difficulty, and it's a real hardship at times to endure that, to maintain that pregnancy until that baby is born.
How would you handle the rebuttal to that of women that are raped?
Okay, rape is one of the most common arguments I get, and there's a few things. I can give you my quick, pithy response, but I'll give you a little more detail on it. So there's 3 points I usually make about rape when it comes up, and I gauge it very carefully, because sometimes people use rape. Now, rape and incest are less than 0.5% of abortions. So it's an attempt to use the exceptional case to make the general rule based on it, and that's not how we make rules. So there's 3 philosophies that I try to evolve. First of all, I'm very sensitive to anybody who mentions the word rape to me, and we all must be. So if it's somebody who's just trying to stick it to me, I can go right at him. But maybe that person has been raped, or has been raped twice, or was raped 20 years ago. And the first words out of my mouth is, I'm really sorry if you've in any way experienced this. I can't imagine the horror of that. And that's not just strategy, that's decency. Mm-hmm. That's so the first thing is, I'm immediately sensitive to the person I'm talking to, because rape is an unbelievable act of violence that I can't even imagine. So the first thing I tell people is be unbelievably sensitive on the issue. And by the way, in the book, somebody emailed me and said, I didn't think you were sensitive enough. And I think when the second edition comes out, I'm going to put that note in there. So I learned from people that email me too. So you can contact me on the website as well, and let me know your opinions, and we'll incorporate them in the book. I want to get better and better. So the first thing is sensitivity. The second thing is, I point out that if your concern about abortion is rape and incest, then I can congratulate you. So then you're really pro-life for 99.5% of cases. That's wonderful. So we agree. Mm-hmm. So then we can just deal with that tiny little case, and maybe we can find some compromise, because those are very difficult and sensitive issues. Now, if you want to get into the philosophy of whether it's appropriate to kill a child because they were conceived by rape, then you ask the question. Again, I'm careful how I phrase this because this is the third thing that I mentioned in the appropriate setting, not at a woman who's just been raped. It's insensitive and it's not appropriate, I think. But I ask, whenever is the solution to a horrible act of violence another horrible act of violence, and that a child is a child irrespective of its means of how it was conceived.
Arguably a worse act of violence.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, but again, I say these things with great sensitivity, not because of strategy by itself, but out of decency and what we say is love in the Christian context of the word. So those are how I do it, and I remind them. Usually, it's the first question I get. What about rape and incest? And I said, well, if that's your concern, that's 1/2%. We could probably agree, we'll come to some great compromise. That means the other 99.5% you're not really worried about. Mm-hmm. And we all agree. Congratulations, you're pro-life, I tell them. You know, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more from that segues from that. What about when the mother's life is at risk? And I think you briefly covered it earlier, but so I think those are the two that kind of come together, right?
And there is no, let's be very clear about this. So the mother's life at risk in the third trimester after viability we talked about, that's a fiction. If the mother's life is at risk, and there's plenty of scenarios where the mother's life at risk when the baby's 28, 29, 30, 31 weeks, deliver the baby. Don't kill the baby, let the baby have a great chance of living. It's viable.
Right.
So that's not the case. The question is before viability, if the mother's life is at risk. And I want to be clear to anybody who's looking at me or thinking, there is no major voice in the pro-life movement that does not favor the life of the mother over the life of the child before viability. At all. There is no major voice. You can't find one. So if the mother's life is at risk and she needs to be treated, the mother should be treated. Now, there are these heroic, self-sacrificial women who I admire, and I'm not passing judgment on either on a woman's decision either way. There are women that delay their chemotherapy and put themselves at risk for their baby, and that's incredibly noble. I wonder if I would be able to do the same thing. I hope I could. But there is no major voice that believes in risking the mother's life to preserve the child. It does not exist. That's a fiction in the media. It's just biased reporting, period. So if you need chemotherapy and the baby's 9 weeks and you want to have chemotherapy, you get chemotherapy. If you're having renal failure because you have only one kidney and your other kidney is failing and you can't endure the pregnancy, there is no major voice that says you shouldn't get an abortion. That is a choice always going to be left to the mothers. Always left to the mother and the family, of course.
What about what we talked about earlier, ectopic pregnancies?
Oh, ectopic pregnancy, yeah. So again, so an ectopic pregnancy, by the way, for those that don't know, so when an egg is released, fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube. And then over the next 7 days, that fertilized egg, which starts as a zygote, which is a living human being by all definition, it migrates into the uterus and plants as a blastocyst, usually around day 7, and is then called an embryo. Sometimes it gets stuck in the fallopian tube and then grows as a baby in the fallopian tube, and that's called an ectopic pregnancy. And an ectopic pregnancy, they cannot be allowed to continue because they rupture, the mother hemorrhages, and it's absolutely a life-threatening emergency, and women die from this. So that's another occasion when the mother must be treated, and that pregnancy cannot be allowed to continue. And again, I don't care what the media is saying, it's nonsense. There is no major, you can find crazies, if you want to go to some blog somewhere, I'm sure you can find some crazy out there. There is no major voice in the pro-life movement who does not believe in treating an ectopic pregnancy and treating it quickly and completely. I want to be clear, these are false, the real arguments are worth discussion. These other arguments, you're a misogynist, you shouldn't speak because you're a male, these are nonsense arguments. The ectopic pregnancy, the life of the mother, these are nonsense arguments they throw at you because somebody's going to enjoy it in the press and start blogging for it. Mm-hmm. The only legitimate discussion really to have, and the Supreme Court justices, the appellate attorneys who are making it, say it's balancing a woman's autonomy, bodily integrity versus the right of a child to live. It's a discussion to have. It's a legitimate discussion. I want bodily integrity over my own body, and I want my wife to have bodily integrity over her own body. But it gets complicated when there's a second body inside her body. But it's not something I dismiss. I don't just say, well, too bad, lady. mean, it's a discussion you have. We have great respect for all women. My wife. I have 5 kids, two very strong daughters, and a very strong wife who I want to have, their own bodily integrity, of course. The problem is when you're discussing these rights, these balancing rights, you're discussing what are the rights themselves. So one is a right to the woman to a lifestyle, a temporary inconvenience, a big inconvenience, but a temporary inconvenience, versus what's the right of the child? To not be killed, the right to life itself. And when you're comparing lifestyle to life trumps lifestyle. That's it. But that's a real discussion to have. When they say, you're a man, you can't talk, no uterus, no opinion, I'm like, okay, I'll give you my answer. You want my answer? I mean, I'll tell you. I got an answer for that. But if it's nonsense, that's a nonsense argument. That's when it's the same thing. Somebody's, on the street screaming at me, reproductive justice. And I say to them, can you define justice for me? What do you mean by justice? And they scream, misogynist. There's no discussion. They're just throwing out nonsense. And I get that all day long.
Mm-hmm.
So in our organization, we define our primary stakeholder as the American citizen, right? Mm-hmm. And we define an American very, very specifically, and it's simply somebody who believes in a creator that endows us with unalienable rights. Mm-hmm. And our standard of measure, as I mentioned earlier, is our founding documents, one of which is the Declaration of Independence. And there's a specific area, which I'd like you to talk about, that references a very specific right in the document.
Right, so we're all entitled to the right to life, our most foundational right to life. It's given to us not by government, given to us by our Creator, and that right cannot be taken away. We say it's unalienable, as the document says. And the way Roe got around it is they said, well, all these things really refer to persons. And we're going to say that it's not a person.
The viability argument.
Yeah, and it's not even the viability, because they don't even declare when they say it's a person. They just say the unborn. They didn't even say viably unborn. They just say the unborn. Nowhere in our history was unborn called a person. That's actually controversial as well, by the way. And Dobbs, a lot of people say about the Dobbs case right now, is there were some people speculating, will the court not just overturn Roe and Casey and allow it to go to the states, but do people have the guts to actually say, we're not going to return to the states. We're going to declare that a fetus is a person and is accorded all the rights and liberties of persons according to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And therefore, it's illegal in all 50 states. Now, the court wasn't ready to go there. I suspect there are those that will go there, and we'll see where litigation and case law goes over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, or sooner. But those are great arguments. I mean, it's when you hold a baby in your hands, and it's very simple. If you look at personhood, just look in the dictionary. A person is a human being, and we've used the word personhood throughout history as a weapon. Whenever somebody says you're not a person, it's always to disenfranchise somebody. It's to oppress them. So who are not persons? Blacks weren't persons. That's how we got them to be slaves. Who are not persons? Jews, they weren't persons, and that's how they were oppressed. Who are not persons? Women weren't persons; they couldn't vote. Irish immigrants weren't persons. So whenever we want to subjugate and hurt a group of people and take advantage of them, let's just call them not persons. There is the only objective definition you can come up with is a person. To be a person is to be a member of the species Homo sapiens. And let me tell you, when you're pregnant on day one, you're not growing an eggplant and you're not growing a bicycle. You're growing a human being from day one. So from day one, it is a person. That's the only objective line you can draw. And then it meets absolutely the criteria. Then we should be,
unalienable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reminded now of the Pledge of Allegiance, which young kids don't recite anymore, and they think it's corny to have a pledge, but it's great to be reminded about what we believe in. And the last line, I was thinking about it as I was preparing tomorrow's talk, with liberty and justice for all. It doesn't say with liberty and justice for those that are sentient and those that can feel pain. It doesn't say with liberty and justice except for people in comas, or except for people with Alzheimer's, with liberty and justice for all. That's not a statement we say, that's a pledge. We make. It hit me like a ton of bricks, because even I get out of the habit, I don't say it as regularly. It doesn't come up unless I'm in a civic organization in some group meeting, and it's a great thing that we're reminded, that we love our country and its foundational documents and the principles upon which this great country was based. And liberty and justice for all means exactly what it says.
Wow.
I think that's a great closing. I don't know if you have anything else.
Oh, I do.
Uh-oh, she's going to test me. Get ready to edit this out. I'm going to mess up, I'm sure.
No, I just went on social media and I gathered some of the questions that can be used as propaganda and misinformation spread. So I just want to go through some of these. They don't have to be long answers, but just if you want to share a little bit. What would you say to somebody that tells you that an embryo is just a clump of cells?
So a clump of cells, again, we just go to the definition, and I can tell you anecdotally an interesting story. So we say that the definition of life is clear. It's a scientific question that science has fully answered, and that a zygote, at fusion of the egg and sperm, you have a living, unique genetic human being. It's not a clump of cells, it's a genetic human being by definition. But this is not the short answer, but it's an interesting answer. So the largest survey of biologists was done a year and a half ago. Over 1,000 worldwide institutions, and almost 6,000 biologists were asked the question, does life begin at conception? What's your guess? What percentage said life begins at conception? 96% of biologists say life begins at conception. So the pro-choice movement was very upset immediately. They said this is a biased study. And they were right, it was biased, but it's biased against the pro-life movement because the respondents had to self-describe themselves. And they were 90% pro-choice, 90% liberal, and 68% atheist. So yeah, thank you. So secular. So if that group put it at 96%, we know it's clear. Remember, this is a scientific question that science has fully settled. I don't even debate this with people anymore. They lost the argument a long time ago. This clump of cells is rhetorical deception. You can go see abortion testimony in court where the abortionists explain the procedure that they do. They render the women unpregnant. That's what they do. They scrape the uterine cavity and safely rendering the woman unpregnant. It's just rhetorical deception. We know. That's why I say, look, just debate with me the truth. Just I'll be honest with you, you be honest with me. But the only discussion we can really have is bodily integrity and autonomy, which is really important for women. I absolutely understand that and respect that incredibly. But this is the balancing test that we have to talk about, the lifestyle versus a life. But these other arguments, they're not honest.
What about, there's another idea that's floating around, and it's that miscarriage could result in jail time because it will be considered murder.
Again.
And that there's a fine line.
Okay, well, a couple things. First of all, it's a fiction. There's not a single major voice in the pro-life movement who has said that at all. Not once, not hinted at it. But more importantly, every major single voice in the pro-life movement has said specifically that even if women, let's say it's made illegal, even if women seek illegal abortions, women will not be prosecuted, the mothers. Even though they're intentionally killing their child, they will not be prosecuted. Only the abortionists performing the procedures illegally, knowingly, against violating the law would be prosecuted. So these are fake arguments. Fake arguments. And I've seen the ectopic one in the newspaper this past week. I've seen the miscarriage in the next week. They're just trying to scare people.
Talking
just trying to get scared. Just nonsense.
What about the argument that if babies have to be born, they're going to be born into terrible, abusive homes? And what do you do with a child after it's been born?
All right, so right now it's estimated there's 2 million families waiting to adopt babies. So the first thing I would, when I see somebody who's worried about not being able to take care of their family and doesn't want the child, I'd say, let me help you streamline this abortion process. Our youngest child is adopted. My life would be so unbelievably incomplete without my daughter. I thank God in fact, my daughter's proof that God exists. If you're not sure, my daughter's proof that God exists. She's born 8,000 miles across the world and somehow made it into our arms, and my life is only complete because of her. That's the first thing. The second thing is it goes back to that argument, and that's you can kill the sufferer or you can fix the problem. So people say, oh, there's a Babylon Bee satiric cartoon. It says this baby, it shows an ultrasound picture, it says this baby was almost born into poverty, but thankfully her mother killed the baby just in time. So that's, again, solutions based on killing innocent living human beings are never acceptable. And we have to remind ourselves that we need to rush out to help people. And one of the things we hear from people all the time is that we, as I mentioned before, that we only care about babies in the uterus. We don't care about them after they're born. And while we all need to do better, that's just a fiction. And I always point out, if you look at the statistics, conservative, religious, pro-life people donate way more of their money, way more of their time, and adopt way more babies than secular, progressive, pro-choice people. So the idea that the pro-choice person says to me, I don't care about babies after they're born, when we donate more, they donate less money, less time, and don't adopt the babies, well, I don't know what they're talking about. It's a ridiculous argument. Can we be better? You bet we can be better. I need to be better, and we all need to be better. So the book, for instance, has resources. It has economic resources. It has emotional support systems set up for it. It has homes for them if they don't have places to live. You need to have those resources on your phone. So if you meet somebody, you got to rush to their aid. If you don't rush to their aid, then you're not pro-life. If you're only for banning pro-life, I'm sorry, you're banning abortion, you're not pro-life. We have to be wholly pro-life.
What about if women turn to at-home abortions? Will that be more dangerous?
Yes, it would be, but we don't ever make bad things. We don't try to make dangerous things safe for women if they're illegal. We never try to make kidnapping children safe and accessible because we're afraid that it might be otherwise dangerous. So Bernard Nathanson was a very famous abortionist who was active during the Roe years and provided testimony. He said 5,000 to 10,000 women died from back alley abortions with hangers per year. And if Roe isn't passed, then these women are going to die each year. Very soon thereafter, he admitted he made that number up completely. It's been estimated about 250 women died a year from abortions, which is horrible and tragic. It's not 5,000 or 10,000. And the vast majority of illegal abortions were performed not in back alleys with coat hangers, but in back offices of gynecologists with medical instruments. And that's what will return now. So the women that want to seek illegal abortions are going to seek it in back alleys. We'll seek it in back offices with gynecologists who are going to continue to break the law. And one of the issues that's going to come up a lot now is medical abortions from oral pills are going to be another can of worms probably we're going to get into today, but that's where a lot of abortions are going to come from as well, early first trimester abortions.
And I just want to clarify, these are questions that I found online, social media, that people in my generation and other generations are spreading, and so that's why I just want to clarify. But as we're wrapping up, I saw one post, and it was talking about how abortions are unfair to minorities.
Sure. The pro-choice movement really doesn't care about minorities, but they do really, really, really want to help them abort their children. So if you look at Planned Parenthood, for example, Planned Parenthood was founded by Margaret Sanger, who was a very proud racist and a proud eugenicist. And she didn't like what she called the indiscriminate breeding of minorities, whom she called human weeds. So her plan was to put abortion centers in minority neighborhoods. 80% of Planned Parenthood are in minority neighborhoods. Her plan has worked remarkably well. Abortion is now the #1 killer of black lives in America, more than violence, cancer, and heart disease combined. So the idea that minorities are not getting enough abortions is a fiction. Minorities and particularly black children are being aborted at exponential rates compared to white rates. It's as close to systemic racism as an example as I can come up with. You know, when I do a whole segment on Planned Parenthood, but if anybody comes up to me to talk about Planned Parenthood, I remind them the #1 killer of children in this country, particularly the children of blacks and minorities, and then they sell their body parts for profit. That's Planned Parenthood. And if somebody says to me, you know, aren't there some good things that Planned Parenthood also does? You know, they do pap smears and HIV testing. I say, yeah, they do. But I can't be supportive of the pap smear going on in room 1 when a baby is being dismembered in room 2. It's that simple. That's Planned Parenthood.
And our organization, too, is very into educating in the curriculums that are in the school system. And we've found that Planned Parenthood has somehow made their way into the school system and almost groomed these kids up, taught them about all these horrible things at a young age, and then they say, come to Planned Parenthood when you get pregnant. And it's...
They have infiltrated the school systems in terms of abortion, and now they're infiltrating the school systems with respect to gender fluidity, whatever that means, and transitioning for cross-hormone therapy as well. So Planned Parenthood really has done an unbelievably bizarre job on our children right now. And that's why we need to get out there, one person at a time. And so when the kids, and that's why I do a lot of speaking to older kids in leadership forums, the kids know the cliches on the other side. Reproductive justice, they want to yell at me. And I say, what is justice? Giving each person their due, right? That's what justice is by definition. So each person, we have to balance. What's the justice for the mother? Autonomy, I get it. What's the justice for the baby? Life. So you got to know what you're saying. and I don't stick it to them by poking them in the eye, but we need to get out there for those kids that are being indoctrinated by Planned Parenthood and arm them with this material in this book, for instance.
Mm-hmm. So you've given us all this information and research, and thank you for that, by the way. But what can we do for our listeners and viewers who are going to watch this that now feel convicted to step up into the pro-life movement? What can we do?
So learn your arguments, learn your 30-second summary of why you're pro-life. Get the courage to go out there and speak to your friends one at a time. And if you have opportunities, I'll just pitch myself for a second, again, because I don't take a dollar, so I'm not embarrassed doing this. I give talks, I do workshops so people know how to use this book. I do it for free. So if you want to reach out to me, go to the website, speakingfortheunborn.org, and reach out to me. And I always say, as long as 2 people will meet with me, I'll give them my presentation.
Thank you for tuning in to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. Give us a like or drop a comment, follow us on social media, and share with your friends. If you liked what you heard, support our mission in empowering American citizens to defend their freedoms and liberty at the local level. Learn more and fund your freedom today by donating at ccdfusa.com. Remember, freedom is in your DNA.